Every Christmas, I waited for the call that never came. It always started the same way. Mid-November rolled around, stores bursting with decorations and jingles humming from every direction, and I'd feel that small ember of hope flickering inside me, against all logic. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe this year they'd remember I existed. But by the first week of December, that ember would start to die out, smothered by silence. No messages, no invitations, just the usual family photos posted online after the fact. Smiling faces in matching pajamas, holding mugs of hot cocoa, sitting around the fireplace in my parents' over-decorated living room. And me? Alone in my one-bedroom apartment, pretending not to care. It's been this way for as long as I can remember. As a kid, I never understood why I was always treated like a guest in my own family. While other kids made Christmas lists and hung stockings with glittered names, mine was always missing. No one said it outright, but it was obvious. Nathan was the favorite. The golden child. The one whose jokes were always funny, whose mistakes were always forgivable, whose triumphs were broadcast like gospel. And I was just there, quiet, forgettable, easy to overlook. I tried everything to be seen. I brought home straight A's, won writing contests, even got into college on a scholarship while Nathan dropped out of 2 schools before Dad paid his way through a 3rd. But it didn't matter. At Christmas, all that mattered was Nathan. The first time they forgot to invite me, I was 16. I didn't think much of it. Mom told me it was last minute, that they assumed I was going to my best friend's family cabin like the year before. I hadn't been, but I let it go. I figured maybe it was just a miscommunication. But then it happened again. And again. Every year came with a new excuse, each one more ridiculous than the last. We thought you were working, you never confirmed, you always seem like you're doing your own thing. At some point, the lies stopped being even remotely believable. I realized it wasn't that they didn't know how to reach me, it was that they didn't want to. The worst part was watching them make the effort for everyone else. My cousins got gift baskets delivered if they couldn't attend. Friends of the family, sometimes even coworkers, were invited for dinner. But me? Nothing. No card, no call, not even a lazy Merry Christmas text. I stopped reaching out. I stopped pretending I didn't notice. The last time I tried to show up uninvited, I was 22. I brought wine and a homemade dessert, dressed up, rang the bell with shaking hands. Nathan opened the door, visibly surprised, and said, "Oh, hey. Didn't know you were coming." I looked past him. My parents were setting the table, laughing with Nathan's girlfriend and her parents. My seat didn't exist. There wasn't even a plate for me. I stood there in the cold, holding that stupid pie, pretending it didn't matter. That was the last time I tried. After that, I started making my own traditions. Christmas Eve walks through the city with a thermos of spiked cider. Watching old movies I loved as a kid. Sometimes I traveled, sometimes I stayed in and cooked for one. People always said they admired my independence, but they didn't know it wasn't a choice. You can only knock on a locked door so many times before you stop bothering. Nathan, of course, never acknowledged any of it. Every year, he posted photos and captions like "Family is everything" and "Wouldn't be Christmas without these people." I was never in the pictures. Once, a mutual friend asked why I never showed up for holidays. I just laughed and said, "Oh, you know, busy schedule." I didn't feel like explaining that my own parents had decided, without ever saying the words, that one child was enough. Sometimes I wondered what I'd done to deserve being cast out like that. Was I too quiet? Too different? Not affectionate enough? I combed through every memory, every holiday, trying to find the moment I became invisible to them. But the truth is, I don't think it was one moment. I think it was gradual, a slow erasure over the years, until one day I simply wasn't part of the picture anymore. And once I was gone, it was just easier to keep pretending I didn't exist. I still send them cards. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me still wants to be acknowledged. Maybe it's force of habit. Last year, I wrote a simple note, "Hope you're well. Wishing you a warm holiday," and mailed it on December 10th. I never heard back. No reply. Not even a thank you. I saw photos of their dinner, Nathan holding his newborn daughter, my parents beaming beside him. I didn't even know he'd had a baby. That hurt more than I want to admit. Not because I wasn't told, but because it confirmed how far removed I was from their lives. A new life had entered the family, and I wasn't even a footnote. I was a stranger now. A ghost haunting their social media feeds, occasionally showing up in tags from distant relatives who still remembered my name. This year, I didn't bother hoping. When the holidays rolled around, I didn't check my phone obsessively. I didn't look for signs. I booked a cabin in Vermont, drove up with my dog, and spent the week in silence. Snow fell heavy, and the only sounds were the creak of old wood and the hiss of logs burning in the stove. I didn't decorate. I didn't bring gifts. But for once, I felt okay. Not happy, not joyful, but at peace. There was no pretending. No waiting. Just me, alone, but not unwanted. I don't know if they'll ever acknowledge what they did. I'm not sure they even see it. To them, I've probably become a cautionary tale, or maybe just an afterthought. But I see it. I lived it. And every Christmas that passes reminds me that family isn't about blood. It's about effort. It's about presence. And sometimes, it's about choosing yourself when no one else will. It had been months of 14-hour workdays, constant revisions, strategy meetings that bled into weekends, and the kind of relentless pressure that made sleep feel like a luxury I couldn't afford. The rebranding project for our biggest client wasn't just another task, it was a high-stakes, company-defining endeavor that no one thought we'd pull off. But I did. I led the team, held everything together when deadlines collapsed and tempers flared, and when the campaign finally launched, it exploded in the best way. Metrics skyrocketed, the client was ecstatic, and the buzz in the Portland office was electric. Still, I didn't expect anything beyond a pat on the back and maybe an awkward shout-out during the next all-hands meeting. That's how it usually went. Do your job, do it well, then get back in line. So when my boss called me into his office and handed me a check with a number that didn't even seem real, $90,000, I froze. My hands trembled as I looked at it, then back at him, waiting for the punchline. But he was smiling, genuinely, telling me how my leadership changed everything, how I had set a new bar for what was possible at our firm. For once, I wasn't just the reliable one who quietly kept things afloat. I was the reason we succeeded, and someone finally saw that. I left work that day in a daze, the check folded neatly in my coat pocket, almost afraid to breathe wrong in case this was all some cruel mistake. The sun had already set over Portland, the streets glowing with early winter lights, and I remember standing on the sidewalk outside the building, people passing me by, everyone in their own world, while mine had just shifted. I had never received anything close to that kind of money. I didn't come from a family where bonuses existed, let alone ones that could cover a year's rent and then some. My mind raced with the possibilities, what this meant, what I could finally do, how many fears I could stop carrying. But before I did anything with it, before I even let myself fully believe it, I needed to share it with someone. Not out of obligation, but because there was only one person whose voice I wanted to hear in that moment, my grandmother. She was the only one in my family who had ever truly believed in me, even when no one else did. When I dropped out of my first college program and moved across the country with 2 suitcases and a stack of rejection letters, she didn't lecture me or feed me guilt. She told me I was brave. When I worked minimum-wage jobs to stay afloat and taught myself design software at night, she sent me handwritten letters with articles she thought might inspire me. When my parents rolled their eyes at my creative career, she told me, without fail, that I was meant for something bigger. So I called her. I didn't even make it back to my apartment first. I sat on a bench outside a coffee shop, my fingers freezing around the phone, and dialed her number. She answered like she always did, like she'd been expecting me, like she'd never stopped hoping I'd call. I could barely get the words out, still shaking, still half in disbelief, but when I told her what had happened, she gasped like she'd won the lottery herself. I could hear the tears in her voice, the pride, the unfiltered joy, and for the first time in my adult life, I cried too. Not from exhaustion, or frustration, or loneliness, but from the overwhelming feeling of being seen. Of being good enough. We stayed on the phone for over an hour, talking about everything and nothing, the way we always did. She asked what I'd do with the money, and I told her the truth, I wasn't sure yet. But I knew one thing for certain, I wanted to use part of it to visit her. It had been too long. Life had gotten in the way, as it so often does, but now there were no more excuses. I had the means, and more importantly, I had a reason to celebrate that didn't feel hollow or performative. I wanted to hug her, to sit at her kitchen table drinking coffee from her chipped porcelain mugs, to be reminded of who I was before the world tried to flatten me. that night, I didn't celebrate with champagne in some downtown bar. I invited my closest friends over, the people who'd seen me at my lowest, who let me crash on their couches, who proofread my resumes and listened to every rant when work felt impossible. We sat on my living room floor, drinking cheap wine and eating pizza straight from the box, laughing so hard my stomach hurt. I told them about the bonus, and they screamed like it was their own win. And in a way, it was. We had all built each other up, piece by piece, year by year. This wasn't just about money. It was about proving to myself, and to the world, that I had made something out of nothing. For the first time, I didn't feel like an afterthought. I didn't feel like I was constantly running just to catch up, like I had to prove my worth in every room I entered. I felt grounded. I felt real. And I knew, deep down, that no matter what I decided to do next, invest it, save it, donate some, spend some, I would carry that feeling with me. Not because of the check, but because of what it represented. All those years of quiet, thankless effort finally amounted to something tangible. Something undeniable. And in that moment, with my grandmother's voice still echoing in my ear and my friends laughing beside me, I felt like I had finally come home to myself. It started on a random Tuesday night, one of those cold, bone-deep evenings where the city felt suffocating and every sound outside my apartment window grated on my nerves. I had been scrolling through real estate listings, not seriously, more out of habit than anything else, letting my mind wander into impossible daydreams of somewhere quieter, slower, untouched. I don't even know what made me search that particular mountain town. Maybe I had heard about it once, or maybe the algorithm was just smarter than I wanted to admit, but when the results loaded, I felt my breath catch in my chest. There it was. An A-frame cabin, tucked into the hillside like it had grown straight from the ground. The entire front wall was made of glass, a towering sheet that looked out over a sweeping valley blanketed in snow. The photos captured it at twilight, the sky a deep blue fading into shadows, and I could almost hear the silence of it. No neighbors. No city noise. Just trees, snow, and the creak of wood settling in the cold. I stared at the listing for nearly an hour, zooming in on every corner of the living room, every knot in the pine walls, every beam of soft winter light that filtered through the massive windows. It felt like the opposite of everything my life had become: crowded, loud, exposed. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. There was a clarity in that decision that surprised me. I didn't want advice, or opinions, or questions about logistics. I didn't want someone to weigh in on whether it was practical or if the town was too remote or if I should wait for a better time. I wanted something that was mine, untouched by anyone else's expectations. So I started making calls, quietly, methodically, under a name no one in my life would recognize. I set up a private LLC, clean, anonymous, impossible to trace back to me without serious effort, and used it to negotiate the purchase. Every email, every document, every transaction was filtered through that layer of distance. I had never felt more in control. When the sale finally went through, it was the middle of December. The same week the city was swallowed in a gray, freezing rain that made everything feel damp and hostile. But up in the mountains, it had snowed for days, soft and powdery and clean. I drove up early in the morning, the highway nearly empty, winding through forests and rising elevation, my breath fogging up the inside of the windshield. The closer I got, the more it felt like stepping out of a life that had always been too loud for me. The town was barely there: a post office, a diner with a single waitress, a gas station that still used analog pumps. No one looked twice at me. When I pulled into the driveway and saw the cabin for the first time in person, it didn't feel like a purchase. It felt like a reclamation. The roof was steep and angular, dusted and white, and the glass wall reflected the trees like a mirror. Inside, it smelled like old wood and pine needles and something deeply familiar, though I'd never been there before. The furniture was simple, nothing ornate, just soft chairs and woven rugs and a stone fireplace that looked like it had been built by hand. I stood in the center of the living room, wrapped in silence, watching snow drift past the window like slow-falling ash, and I felt something inside me loosen for the first time in years. There were no traces of me in that house yet. No photos, no clutter, nothing to suggest a life had been lived there. And I liked it that way. Clean, blank, full of potential. I didn't have to justify its existence to anyone. No one would know to ask about it. It wouldn't show up on any social media or be casually mentioned in conversation. I had learned the hard way that not everything should be shared, especially not the things that made me feel safe. Too many times I had let people into parts of my life only to watch them twist it, minimize it, insert themselves into it. This cabin would be different. It was mine, completely, privately, fully. I spent that first night without turning on the television or connecting to Wi-Fi. Just a fire in the hearth, a stack of old books I found on the shelf, and a bottle of wine I'd picked up from a roadside stand on the way in. I listened to the wind rattle gently against the windows and the low groan of the trees shifting in the cold. At some point, I fell asleep on the couch, wrapped in a wool blanket, the flames dying low, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't wake up in a panic. Owning that cabin wasn't about escaping my life, not exactly. It was about carving out a space that existed entirely outside of everything that had ever tried to define me. A space where I wasn't performing or explaining or translating myself for the comfort of others. Just a place to be. No scripts. No expectations. Just quiet. Just breath. Just snow. The cabin had become my sanctuary in ways I hadn't even fully understood when I first bought it. For weeks, I poured myself into restoring it, sanding down the rough edges of the weather-beaten deck, repainting the window frames with slow, deliberate strokes, crawling under the floorboards to rewire outdated circuits with frozen fingers and a flashlight clenched between my teeth. Every nail I drove, every corner I cleaned, was an act of quiet reclamation. I didn't hire help. I wanted the work. I needed it. The physical exhaustion was honest and clean, a kind of silence my body could understand. There was no rush, no deadlines. I didn't have to make it perfect for anyone but myself. By the time I finally stepped back and looked at the finished deck, newly stained, lined with a simple wooden bench and overlooking that still, snow-blanketed valley, it felt like breathing for the first time after holding it in for years. I made a cup of tea, wrapped myself in a flannel, and sat there watching the shadows shift across the trees as the sun began to set behind the hills. The sky turned pale gold and then deepened into that strange, bruised blue that only comes just before nightfall in the mountains. It was too beautiful not to capture. So I snapped a single photo. No filters. No editing. Just that moment, the clean lines of the deck, the untouched snow beyond it, the quiet that hummed between everything. I posted it to my private Instagram, just a few close friends, people I actually trusted, with a caption that read, "Bought myself a quiet place." No tags, no location, no explanation. I didn't think twice about it. I didn't expect it to end up in the family group chat. That chat had been dead for months, months of no replies to my messages, months of watching them gush over Nathan's every milestone while ignoring mine, months of birthdays forgotten, texts left unread. So when my phone buzzed 10 minutes after I posted, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. It was my mother. Just one line. No greeting, no context. "Nathan and Becca can move in by Friday. We're so blessed." For a second, I genuinely didn't understand what she meant. I read the text 3, 4 times, my mind stumbling over the words like they'd been written in a language I didn't speak. Then it hit me. The photo. Someone had screenshotted it. Someone had shared it. And without asking, without clarifying, without even the smallest attempt at conversation, they had decided my home, my private, hard-earned, painfully quiet home, was going to be handed over to my brother and his fiancée like it was just another family asset waiting to be distributed. Not a question. Not a suggestion. A declaration. The audacity of it hit me like a wave of cold water. This wasn't just an assumption, it was an invasion. A complete erasure of my effort, my boundaries, my ownership. In their eyes, it didn't matter that I had paid for the house myself. That I had spent months fixing it. That I had created this place as an escape from them. What mattered was that Nathan needed it. And when Nathan needed something, the family rearranged itself to accommodate him, as it always had. I stared at the message, numb, then angry, then cold in a way that felt deeper than fury. I thought about every night I had slept in that cabin with the fire burning low, every hour spent on my hands and knees scrubbing floors, every drive through winding roads in silence. None of that mattered to them. They saw it as mine only until it became convenient for someone else. And then it wasn't mine anymore. I didn't respond. Not at first. I sat there, letting the quiet of the mountains wrap around me, trying to anchor myself in the stillness. My phone buzzed again, more messages lighting up the screen. My father chiming in with, "This is such a blessing. Nathan's job search has been so stressful. My aunt, it's so good to see the family pulling together again. My mother again, we'll bring up some furniture this weekend. You won't need all that space alone. That last part did something to me. You won't need all that space alone. As if solitude were a mistake. As if privacy were a waste. As if the house I built with my own hands had never belonged to me at all. In their world, my existence was always supposed to orbit someone else. I was always meant to be a resource, not a person. A placeholder. A support beam. Never the one being supported. I turned off my phone. I didn't reply that night. Or the next. I left the messages unanswered, let them pile up and grow stale. In the days that followed, the snow came down heavier, blanketing the road in a thick, hushed white. I didn't leave the cabin. I didn't check the group chat. I watched the valley disappear into mist and ice and let myself feel the weight of what they'd tried to take from me. And then I did what I had always done. I took a breath. I reclaimed the space they tried to trespass. I reminded myself, quietly but firmly, that I didn't owe them anything, not my silence, not my space, and certainly not my home. It happened so quickly I didn't even have time to process it. One moment I was sitting in the kitchen, drinking coffee while the snow drifted past the windows in slow, soft spirals, the cabin still warm with the quiet I had fought so hard to protect, and the next, I heard the sound of tires crunching up the icy gravel driveway, too loud, too close, too many. I looked out the window and saw them. My parents. Nathan. Becca. A car I didn't recognize. Doors flying open. Trunks being popped. A man stepping out with a tool bag slung over one shoulder. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. Then I noticed what they were carrying: bags, boxes, a foldable crib in its original packaging. And the locksmith. My heart dropped so fast I felt lightheaded. Before I could even get to the front door, they were already walking up the steps like they owned the place. My mother reached the porch first, her gloved hands full of wrapped gifts, a too cheerful smile plastered across her face as if this was some surprise reunion instead of a complete ambush. "There you are," she said like I'd been expecting them. "I told your father we should have come earlier, but you know how the snow is. Where should we set the crib?" Behind her, the locksmith was already eyeing the front door hardware, speaking in quiet tones to my father, who handed him something small, a set of documents, maybe? Tools? I couldn't even tell. Nathan stood off to the side, holding his phone, one arm wrapped around Becca, who looked cold and tired but smugly satisfied, like she was finally being handed something she'd been promised. No one asked to come inside. No one greeted me like a homeowner. They just moved, with the kind of entitled certainty I had seen in them 1,000 times before but never quite like this. I stepped in front of the door, blocking the entrance, my voice catching in my throat before I forced it out. "What the hell are you doing?" My mom didn't even flinch. She breezed past the question like I hadn't spoken at all. "We couldn't get a hold of you, so we figured you were busy getting ready. Nathan said there was plenty of room, and the photos looked so cozy. This is going to be the best Christmas in years." I looked at my father, hoping for a flicker of sanity, some acknowledgement that this was wildly inappropriate, that they were out of line. But he just crossed his arms, already scanning the cabin as if calculating square footage in his head. "We need to talk about liability. If Nathan and Becca are living here, the ownership structure needs to be reviewed. The LLC complicates things, and if you're not occupying the property full-time, we need to know who's paying the utilities, taxes, insurance. We don't want surprises come April." I was so stunned I didn't speak right away. My breath hung in the cold air as they stood there waiting for me to move, to unlock the door, to let them take over. And then Nathan lifted his phone and sent a message: no eye contact, no acknowledgement, just a casual thumbs-up emoji and a photo labeled nursery. It was a picture of one of the cabin's smaller rooms. My room. The space where I kept books and notebooks and a reading chair I had dragged up the stairs myself. And in the middle of it, digitally drawn in with some decorating app, was a mock-up of a baby crib, cartoon animals on the wall, pastel curtains. A full plan, already imagined, already claimed. No one asked me. No one told me. They had just decided. I could feel the heat rising behind my eyes, my stomach twisting, hands going numb despite the gloves. I wasn't even surprised, not really. I had known, deep down, the moment I saw that group chat message that this was more than just a boundary being tested, it was a full invasion. But part of me had hoped it was empty talk, another round of passive-aggressive guilt that I could ignore until it passed. I never thought they would actually show up. That they would come with a locksmith, with luggage, with a goddamn crib. This wasn't miscommunication. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was entitlement in its purest form. They didn't see me as a person with rights, or as someone who had built something with their own hands. They saw me as an extension of them. A resource. A spare room. A quiet daughter who would fold and adapt and step aside like always. But this time, they had miscalculated. They had come to take over my life, uninvited and unannounced, with no regard for the effort it had taken to get here. And for the first time, I didn't feel confused or hurt or even sad. I felt furious. Not the kind of fury that burns out fast and leaves you crying in its place, but a clean, cold, unwavering fury that made everything clear. They were standing on my porch, trying to break into my house, talking about Christmas and tax implications like I wasn't even there. Like I didn't matter. Like I was a technicality in their plan. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. I didn't raise my voice when I said it, and I didn't soften it either. I stood there on the porch, the cold air biting into my lungs, my family clustered in front of me with their bags and boxes and assumptions, and I said the words slowly and clearly so there could be no misunderstanding. No. I've made other plans. The sentence hung there, heavier than I expected, like the mountains themselves were listening. My mother blinked, her smile faltering for the first time since they arrived, as if she genuinely couldn't process that the script had changed. Nathan frowned at his phone. Becca shifted her weight, tightening her grip on the crib box. No one moved. They were waiting for me to correct myself, to laugh nervously and step aside like I always had. Instead, I repeated it. No one is moving in. This is my house. You need to leave. The reaction was immediate and explosive. My mother's face hardened, the warmth evaporating into something sharp and offended. My father stepped forward, his jaw clenched, his voice dropping into that tone he used when he wanted to intimidate rather than argue. He didn't speak to me like a daughter. He spoke to me like a malfunctioning tool. He pulled out his phone and called me even though I was standing right in front of him, as if hearing his voice through a screen would somehow restore the power dynamic he was used to. I answered. Not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted a record of it. The moment I picked up, he didn't waste time. Be useful, he snapped, the words clipped and venomous, like they had been waiting on his tongue for years. Do you have any idea how much pressure Nathan is under right now? You have space. You have money. This is what family does. You help when you're needed. There it was. Not concern. Not love. Utility. The same role they had always assigned me, just said out loud this time. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. Something had settled in me, something solid and immovable. I told him, calmly and without apology, that no one was moving in, that the property was not available to them now or ever, and that if they showed up uninvited again, I would involve the authorities. I told him this was not a negotiation. I told him this was final. He laughed, a short, disbelieving sound, and launched into a tirade about ungrateful children, about how everything I had was because of them, about how I thought I was better than everyone else now that I had a little money and a little house in the mountains. He accused me of tearing the family apart right before Christmas. He told me I was selfish, dramatic, cruel. He told me I would regret this. And then, when none of that worked, he went quiet for a beat and said, in a low voice, that I was making a mistake I wouldn't be able to undo. I listened. I let him finish. And then I said, do not come to my property again without my explicit permission. Do not send anyone on your behalf. Do not attempt to access this house. If you do, it will be treated as trespassing. I hung up before he could respond. The silence afterward was deafening. On the porch, my mother was staring at me like she didn't recognize me at all. Nathan finally looked up from his phone, irritation flickering across his face, as if this inconvenience were my fault. Becca whispered something to him, her eyes darting around the cabin like she was mentally rearranging furniture that would never be hers. The locksmith cleared his throat awkwardly and took a step back, clearly realizing he had been dragged into something he wanted no part of. You're really doing this? My mother asked, her voice trembling between anger and disbelief. After everything we've done for you? I didn't answer her. I didn't justify myself. I didn't explain. I had spent my entire life explaining, shrinking, translating myself into something more palatable for them. I was done. I stepped aside just enough to open the door behind me, not to let them in, but to reach inside and grab my coat. I put it on slowly, deliberately, and then I pointed down the driveway. "You need to leave," I said. "Now." They stood there for another long moment, waiting for me to crack, to take it back, to apologize. When I didn't, when it became clear that this version of me wasn't budging, my father scoffed, my mother muttered something about disappointment, and Nathan shook his head like I was being unreasonable. They loaded their things back into the cars with exaggerated movements, slamming doors, making sure I could feel their anger in every sound. The crib was shoved back into the trunk like an insult. No one said goodbye. I watched them drive away until the road was empty again, until the only thing left was the snow settling softly over their tire tracks, erasing them inch by inch. My legs gave out the moment they were gone. I sank onto the steps, my heart pounding, adrenaline still flooding my system. I didn't cry. I just sat there, breathing, letting the reality of what I had done sink in. I had said no. Out loud. Without qualifiers. Without escape hatches. I had chosen myself in a way I never had before, and it was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. That night, after the cabin had gone quiet again and the fire burned low, I opened my laptop. My hands were steady now. I created a new folder on my desktop. I didn't overthink the name. I called it exactly what it was. Boundary Enforcement. Inside it, I began saving everything. Screenshots of messages. Voicemails. Photos of the cars in my driveway. Dates. Times. Notes about what was said and by whom. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I planned to use it right away. But because I finally understood something I had spent years avoiding. People who don't respect boundaries don't stop when you ask nicely. They stop when there are consequences. This folder wasn't about fear. It was about clarity. It was proof to myself that what had happened was real, that I wasn't overreacting, that I wasn't imagining the entitlement or the disrespect. It was documentation of a pattern I had lived with my entire life, now finally acknowledged instead of excused. When I closed the laptop and looked around the cabin, it felt different. Not fragile anymore. Not like something that could be taken from me with enough pressure. It felt defended. Claimed. Solid. I slept that night deeper than I had in weeks, the kind of sleep that comes after a hard, necessary decision. For the first time, I wasn't bracing for the next demand. I wasn't waiting for the next invasion. I had drawn the line, and I was prepared to hold it. I didn't wait. The moment I woke up the next morning, with the echo of my father's voice still replaying in my mind, condescending, manipulative, angry, I brewed a strong pot of coffee and sat down at my kitchen table, opening my laptop with purpose. There was no room for second guessing. I had drawn the line, and now I needed to reinforce it with more than words. I spent the first half hour searching for legal professionals in the region, narrowing the list down to a few local attorneys who specialized in property and civil disputes. I needed someone who wasn't just competent but unshakable. I needed someone who wouldn't treat this like just another dysfunctional family drama. That's how I found Sable Winters. Her name stood out immediately, sharp, direct, no nonsense. Her bio on the firm's site was brief and to the point, over 15 years of experience in property law, conflict resolution, and what she tactfully referred to as interfamily boundary enforcement. I called the number listed. Her assistant answered, and when I explained the situation, no embellishments, just the facts, there was a pause, followed by a quiet hold, please. Less than a minute later, Sable herself picked up. Her voice was calm and professional, but I could hear the steel underneath it. She didn't waste time. I outlined what had happened, how my family had arrived uninvited, brought a locksmith, tried to move in, and refused to leave until I forced them out. I told her I owned the property under a private LLC, that I had made it explicitly clear they were not welcome, and that I was worried this wasn't the end of it. She asked sharp, efficient questions. Had I saved evidence? Yes. Did I have video or photo documentation of their presence? Yes. Did I have proof of ownership? Absolutely. Her tone didn't waver once. Treat this like a hostile corporate takeover, she said. Because that's what it is. Within hours, I was in her office, seated across from her at a desk that looked like it had never known clutter. The windows behind her framed the snow-covered trees of the mountain, and the walls were lined with shelves of binders and case files, all meticulously labeled. She wore a dark blazer and didn't smile once, not because she was unfriendly, but because she didn't deal in pleasantries. She dealt in action. We filed a no trespass order before lunch. She explained the process in plain terms, walking me through each step. Because the property was privately owned under an LLC and clearly marked, and because I had photographic and text evidence of their attempted occupation, we could file a civil no trespass order barring my parents and Nathan from entering the property or attempting to access it in any way. It wouldn't be permanent, yet, but it would be enough to put legal teeth behind the boundaries I had already set. If they returned without permission, law enforcement could be called immediately. No more gray area. No more discussions. When I returned to the cabin later that day, something had shifted inside me. The emotional weight of their invasion hadn't lifted completely, but it had transformed into something functional, something actionable. I didn't feel like prey anymore. I felt like a person finally reclaiming their space with the full weight of the law behind them. I ordered security cameras that night. Discreet, high resolution, with motion detection and real-time alerts. I installed them myself the next morning, 2 facing the driveway, 1 on the front porch, another discreetly mounted near the back door. The devices synced to my phone and sent instant notifications if someone approached the property. I tested every angle, reviewed the footage, adjusted the settings until the coverage was seamless. I didn't want to live in fear, but I also refused to leave anything to chance. Next, I replaced every lock. The smart locks were sleek and unassuming, designed to blend into the natural wood of the cabin doors. Each one could be remotely controlled from my phone, protected with multi-factor authentication, and could generate temporary guest codes with expiration timers. I programmed them with only one permanent user, myself. No backup codes. No emergency access. If someone tried to tamper with them, I'd be notified within seconds. Sable had made another suggestion before I left her office: codify everything, even the smallest policies. Make the expectations impossible to misunderstand. So I sat down and drafted a formal guest policy. It wasn't long, just a single printed page, but it covered every detail. No unannounced visitors. All overnight guests must be approved in writing, with dates and duration specified. Violating this policy would result in permanent revocation of access. I printed it, placed it in a clear plastic sleeve, and mounted it inside the front closet door, directly next to the coat rack. The placement wasn't accidental. I wanted it to be visible the moment anyone stepped inside. It wasn't about theatrics. It was about documentation, about control, about making my boundaries visible and enforceable in a way that couldn't be dismissed as emotional or overreactive. Every measure I took, from the cameras to the locks to the printed policies, was a declaration: this is my home, and I will protect it. For years, I had been trained to believe that protecting myself was selfish. That saying no was cruel. That refusing to share was a moral failing. But what I was finally beginning to understand, what Sable had made painfully clear, was that people like my family relied on that conditioning to keep me compliant. They didn't need to break down doors when they could manipulate me into unlocking them. Not anymore. That night, I slept with my phone beside me, the camera feed open on the screen, watching the soft swirl of snow across the driveway. The silence was no longer fragile, it was fortified. And for the first time, I felt something close to safe. December 23rd arrived wrapped in a strange, brittle calm. The kind that feels artificial, like the world is holding its breath before something breaks. I remember waking up early that morning, the cabin still dark, the snow outside untouched and glowing faintly under the moonlight. I made coffee, fed the fire, and sat by the glass wall watching the sky slowly lighten over the valley. I should have felt peaceful. Instead, there was a tension humming under my skin, a quiet certainty that this wasn't over yet. People who ignore boundaries don't stop because you draw a line. They stop when they are forced to. By mid-morning, the cameras were quiet. No alerts. No movement. I allowed myself to believe, briefly, that maybe the no trespass order had done its job. Maybe they had finally understood that I wasn't bluffing. That hope lasted until just after noon. My phone buzzed sharply against the kitchen counter. Motion detected, driveway. I didn't rush to the window. I didn't need to. I already knew. I opened the camera feed, and there they were, exactly as before and somehow worse for it. My parents' car pulling in first, tires cutting deep lines into the fresh snow. Nathan's car behind them. And a third vehicle I recognized immediately, a locksmith's van, logo printed boldly on the side like this was just another routine job. The sheer audacity of it made my chest tighten. They hadn't learned anything. If anything, they had escalated. They parked and got out, moving with that same entitled confidence, bundled up against the cold, carrying tools and paperwork and irritation. My mother marched ahead like she always did, her posture rigid with purpose. My father spoke animatedly to the locksmith, gesturing toward the door like a man explaining a problem that needed fixing. Nathan lagged behind, phone already in his hand, documenting the moment as if this were some minor inconvenience instead of a criminal act. I didn't open the door. I stayed exactly where I was, standing in the kitchen, heart pounding but mind clear, watching everything unfold through the camera feed like a controlled experiment. When they reached the porch, my mother pressed the doorbell, holding it down longer than necessary, as if force alone could make me comply. The chime echoed softly through the cabin, calm and polite, completely at odds with what was happening outside. I waited a beat, then activated the speaker. "This is private property. Please leave." My voice came through the system steady and unmistakable, stripped of emotion. No pleading. No anger. Just fact. I watched their reactions closely. My mother's head snapped up toward the camera, her mouth tightening into a thin line. My father threw his hands up in frustration, already talking over me as if I were physically present and interrupting him. Nathan didn't even look surprised. He just sighed, like I was being difficult again. They didn't leave. Instead, my father turned back to the locksmith and said something I couldn't hear but didn't need to. The locksmith hesitated. I saw it clearly, the shift in his posture, the way he glanced at the door, then back at my father, then up at the camera. He asked a question. My father answered. My mother crossed her arms. Nathan nodded. And then the locksmith knelt down and took out his drill. That was the moment everything inside me went cold. There was no more doubt. No more internal debate about whether I was overreacting, whether this could still be resolved with conversation, whether I should give them one last chance. They were attempting to forcibly enter my home after being explicitly told to leave, after being legally barred from the property. This wasn't family conflict anymore. This was a crime. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I didn't speak to them again at all. I picked up my phone and called the sheriff. My voice didn't shake when I gave my name, my address, explained that individuals previously served with a no trespass order were actively attempting to break into my property with a locksmith. The dispatcher didn't question me. She didn't minimize it. She told me deputies were already en route and instructed me to stay inside and keep monitoring the situation. I thanked her and ended the call. Outside, the drill whined to life. The sound carried faintly through the thick cabin door, high-pitched and invasive, like a mosquito you can't swat. I watched through the camera feed as the locksmith started on the lock, his movements no longer tentative. Snow fell around them in slow, steady sheets, softening the scene in a way that felt grotesquely wrong, like violence wrapped in a holiday postcard. My mother paced. My father stood too close to the door, pointing and muttering. Nathan filmed. I felt detached, like I was watching someone else's life unfold, but beneath that detachment was something solid and immovable. I had done everything right. I had been clear. I had been calm. I had taken every legal step available to me. Whatever happened next was on them. The first flash of red and blue lights appeared at the edge of the driveway like a sudden rupture in reality. Then another. And another. The snow lit up in sharp, pulsing color, reflecting off the trees, the glass wall of the cabin, the startled faces on my porch. The drill stopped abruptly. The locksmith scrambled to his feet, panic evident even through the grainy camera feed. 2 sheriff's vehicles pulled in and parked behind my family's cars, effectively blocking them in. Doors opened. Deputies stepped out, hands resting near their belts, movements controlled and deliberate. One of them spoke, voice firm, commanding attention. I couldn't hear the words clearly, but I didn't need to. The body language told the entire story. Confusion turned to outrage on my mother's face. My father gestured wildly, pointing at the door, at the locksmith, at the house like he was entitled to an explanation. Nathan lowered his phone for the first time, his posture stiffening as reality finally caught up with him. The locksmith immediately began backpedaling, hands raised, talking fast, clearly trying to distance himself from the situation. One of the deputies approached the door. I opened the app and spoke through the speaker again, confirming my identity, my location inside the house, and that I had not given anyone permission to be on the property. The deputy nodded and turned back to the group. That was when it happened. The moment that burned itself into my memory. My family, my parents, my brother, stood there stunned, silent, as they were ordered to step away from the door and off the property. No arguing. No negotiating. Just compliance. The authority in the deputy's voice cut through everything my father had tried to build over decades of control. Papers were requested. Names were checked. The no trespass order was confirmed. The color drained from my mother's face. My father's anger collapsed inward, replaced by something small and ugly. Nathan stared at the ground. They were escorted back to their cars, not gently, not cruelly, just firmly, the way people are moved when they no longer have any power in the situation. The locksmith was questioned separately, his drill confiscated, his explanations growing more frantic by the second. I stayed inside the entire time, watching, breathing, letting the reality of it sink in. When the cars finally pulled away, tires spinning slightly on the snow, red and blue lights fading back into the forest, the driveway was left scarred with tracks and churned ice. But the cabin stood untouched. The door was intact. The locks held. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel guilt. I felt relief. The kind that settles deep in your bones when the threat is gone, when the thing you feared might happen actually does and you survive it intact. I turned off the camera feed, sank down onto the couch, and stared at the ceiling as the adrenaline slowly drained from my body. They had tried to break in. And for the first time in my life, they failed. Christmas morning should have been quiet. I had planned it that way deliberately, no obligations, no schedule, no artificial cheer forced into place to satisfy anyone else's expectations. The cabin was still, the wood stove crackling softly, casting flickering orange light across the floor. Outside, the trees were heavy with fresh snow, the kind that makes the whole forest look frozen in time. I had just poured my coffee and was settling into the armchair by the glass wall when my phone buzzed, a single notification lighting up the screen. It was from a college friend I hadn't spoken to in a while, someone loosely connected to my family on social media. The message was short. "Hey, did you know your mom just posted this?" That's all it said. I didn't want to look. I already knew I was still carrying the weight of what had happened 2 days earlier, the break-in attempt, the sheriff's arrival, the stunned silence as they were ordered off the property. I was still decompressing from the tension of having to watch my own family cross a line so clearly and so deliberately that even law enforcement couldn't pretend it was a misunderstanding. I hadn't heard from them since, and I had naively thought that maybe, just maybe, they had finally gotten the message. That silence was an ending. It wasn't. I opened Facebook, not because I use it often, but because I knew they did. It took less than 30 seconds to find the post. My mother's profile, public, decorated with wreaths and holiday borders, sitting at the top of the feed with a timestamp marked just after sunrise. There was a photo attached, Nathan and Becca, standing in front of a tree-lined driveway dusted with snow. It was angled just enough to include the front deck of my cabin in the background. The caption, written in that performative, sugar-sweet tone she always used when she wanted attention, read, "Christmas miracle. After so much uncertainty this year, our Nathan and sweet Becca finally have a safe, cozy place to raise their family. We couldn't be more proud. #grateful, #family first, #blessed." She had tagged the mountain town by name. The audacity of it hit me like a physical blow. Not only had they attempted to forcibly enter my home, not only had they violated a legal order and brought a locksmith to my doorstep, not only had they been removed by sheriff's deputies, but now, days later, they were trying to rewrite the entire narrative in real time, publicly, with filters and hashtags and a curated lie designed to garner sympathy and praise. I stared at the post, my coffee cooling in my hand, my chest tightening with a kind of helpless rage that felt almost surreal. The comment section was already filling with congratulations, heart emojis, and breathless support from extended family, church acquaintances, and people I hadn't seen since childhood. What a beautiful gesture. You're all so generous. What a perfect Christmas gift. They're so lucky to have you. Some had even shared it. It was more than a lie. It was a complete fabrication of ownership, identity, and intention. They were framing my home, my legally purchased, privately secured, fully paid-for cabin, as if it were a gift they had given, as if it were their act of kindness, as if I didn't exist at all. My name was never mentioned. Not even a vague reference to our daughter or a family member. Just Nathan and Becca and a vague, self-congratulatory cloud of altruism that positioned them as the benevolent, supportive parents who had made everything possible. It was a campaign. Worse than that, it was deliberate. They knew what they were doing. They knew people wouldn't question the narrative if it was wrapped in holiday cheer and family branding. They were trying to repair their reputations by smearing over the truth, by turning the cabin into a symbol of their generosity instead of a testament to their entitlement. And they didn't stop there. Later that afternoon, I drove into town to pick up a few things: groceries, a replacement snow shovel, some extra batteries. The roads were quiet, most shops closed, the entire town wrapped in that peaceful stillness that only comes on Christmas Day. I stopped by the post office out of habit. I hadn't received much since I moved here, but I liked checking my P.O. box. It gave me a sense of routine, something grounding. But when I handed over my ID, the clerk hesitated. She looked at her screen, then back at me. "Did you put in a forwarding request?" she asked. I frowned. "No." She turned the monitor slightly, not enough for me to read everything, but enough to see the headers. A mail forwarding request had been filed in my name, on the 22nd. The day before the attempted break-in. It listed a forwarding address, my parents' suburban home, 3 hours away. My stomach dropped. They hadn't just tried to take my house. They had tried to take everything connected to me, my mail, my privacy, my legal identity. It wasn't just a power grab. It was a calculated, premeditated move to erase me from the narrative entirely. If I hadn't come in that day, if the clerk hadn't asked, I might never have known. My banking statements, my legal documents, my correspondence, they would have all gone to them. I asked her to cancel the request immediately. She did. I asked if they had come in person or filed online. It had been online, she said, but she noted that she could flag the box for any future activity and notify me directly if anything unusual happened. I thanked her, walked out to my car, and sat in the driver's seat for a long time, the engine off, my hands shaking. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I didn't cry. There was no point. What I felt wasn't sadness. It was the cold, steady realization that this wasn't over. They weren't going to stop just because they had been told no. They weren't going to stop because the law had gotten involved. They were trying to remove me from my own life and replace me with a story that suited them better. I drove home slowly, carefully, checking my mirrors more than usual. When I got back to the cabin, I walked the perimeter, checked the locks, reviewed the camera footage. No movement. No cars. Just snow and quiet. I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. I started documenting everything. Screenshots of the Facebook post. The comments. The timestamp. A written record of the P.O. box incident. The names of the clerks. The call log from the sheriff's department. The stills from the security footage. I added it all to the boundary enforcement folder. Organized, labeled, backed up to an encrypted drive. They wanted a narrative. I'd give them one, just not the one they were writing. Because I knew now, without a shred of doubt, that the people who raised me would rather erase me than respect me. They would rather rewrite the story than admit I had drawn a boundary and enforced it. And as long as they thought they could get away with it, they would keep trying. The hits didn't stop. After the Facebook post and the mail forwarding attempt, I knew they weren't finished, but I still wasn't prepared for how far they'd go. I had braced myself for another wave of social media spin, more lies shared in group chats and public comments, maybe even another visit to the property disguised as some kind of miscommunication. What I wasn't expecting was fraud, calculated, documented, deeply illegal fraud, designed to make it look like they belonged here more than I did. It started when Sable called me 3 days after Christmas. I had just come back from a snowshoeing trail nearby, trying to clear my head, when I saw the missed call and her follow-up email marked urgent. I didn't even take off my boots. I called her back immediately. Her voice was clipped, measured, but beneath it, I could hear the edge of disbelief. She didn't lead with small talk. "We found something," she said. "Actually, we found several things." She had started digging deeper, following up with county records, flagging property data changes, cross-referencing any filings linked to my home address or LLC. One of her paralegals had been monitoring digital public record portals, and that's where they caught the first discrepancy: an application for vehicle registration, filed under my property's address, with Nathan's full name. He had attempted to register his car, his out-of-state car, to my residential address, less than a week after the no trespass order was filed. The DMV flagged it because the property ownership didn't match his name, and the application had missing supporting documents. But it was still processed far enough to trigger a record update attempt and was logged in the system. It would have flown completely under my radar if Sable hadn't been watching. "He's trying to establish residential presence," she said. "And that's only the beginning." I could barely respond. My mouth was dry. I remember gripping the edge of the kitchen counter, the wood cold beneath my fingers, as she continued. Next came the utility call. 2 days after the break-in attempt, on December 25th, while I was sitting in my cabin documenting their lies and false claims, my father had called the regional utility company that serviced my address. He had the account number. He had my full name. And he had a story ready. He told the customer service agent that I was not well, that I had recently moved into the property but was overwhelmed by the demands of maintaining a household alone. He said he was stepping in as my father to help with account management, that he needed to add his name for emergencies and billing purposes, that I had consented verbally. He almost got away with it. The only reason he didn't was because the agent on the line, some underpaid, overworked voice in a call center, decided to double-check and called my secondary phone number listed on the account, which I had recently updated after installing the smart system. I didn't pick up that day. I never even saw the call, but the flag was created internally when the line rang through to voicemail and didn't match the man's voice or information. The request was shelved for follow-up. Sable had already subpoenaed phone call records and internal communication logs by the time she told me. She read the notes from the agent back to me, word for word. I stood there, motionless, feeling something cold settle in my chest. I didn't know what disturbed me more, that he had the audacity to pretend he was helping me, or that he so convincingly played the part of the concerned parent that no one questioned it at first. But then came the real bombshell. She sent the document to me via secure link, password protected, with a brief subject line: lease agreement, urgent. I clicked it. My laptop fan kicked on from the encryption processing. The PDF opened slowly. And there it was, in grotesque, formal Times New Roman, a tenancy agreement. A fake lease. It was labeled clearly at the top: residential lease agreement, 12-month term. The address listed was mine. The landlord's information was me. Or at least, someone pretending to be me. The name was close, just close enough to feel invasive. My first and last name were spelled correctly, but they had inserted a middle initial I have never used. A middle initial that doesn't exist. The fake me had agreed to rent out the property to Nathan and Rebecca, last name redacted, beginning December 1st, for a symbolic monthly rent of $1. The signature at the bottom was shaky, but deliberately styled to resemble mine. The date was backdated to early November. They had literally forged a lease. Not a verbal claim. Not a vague threat. A physical document with falsified information meant to simulate a legal arrangement that would justify Nathan establishing residence and potentially claim tenant rights. It was the kind of scheme someone would put together after Googling how to claim someone's property by pretending to live there and then going one step further. The signature looked wrong, but not comically so. It was passable if you weren't familiar with my handwriting. They had tried to make it convincing. Enough to fool a third party. Enough to raise doubt if things ever escalated into a civil dispute. It was brazen, it was calculated, and it was criminal. I don't remember how long I stared at that document. I kept reading and rereading the phrasing: occupants shall be entitled to peaceful enjoyment of the property, landlord agrees to furnish utilities and internet, tenants may make reasonable changes to the interior configuration of the premises, each line dripping with the entitlement I had grown up drowning in. I could see their fingerprints on it. I could imagine my father dictating it, my mother fussing over the wording to make it sound plausible, Nathan approving it like a business contract. They weren't just trying to take my home. They were building a paper trail to make it look like they already had. I forwarded everything to the boundary enforcement folder. Screenshots. Downloaded copies. I backed it all up twice. Sable was already preparing for escalation. She told me this went beyond civil territory. We were now in potential mail fraud, attempted identity misrepresentation, and criminal forgery. Charges could be filed. And if they kept pushing, they would be. I asked her one question, my voice low, even. Can they still try to move in? She didn't hesitate. Not legally. Not morally. Not with an ounce of justification. But people like this? If you're asking if they'll try again, I'd bet on it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up with the fire burning low, the wind pressing against the windows like it was trying to warn me. I watched the camera feeds. I went over every document, every screenshot, every call log. I played through the worst-case scenarios in my head, not because I was scared, but because I wanted to be ready. They had crossed into criminal territory. And they still thought they could get away with it. By the time we reached the final move, I had nothing left to say, and nothing left to prove. The facts had done all the speaking for me. Every step they took, every entitled demand, every manipulative half-truth and outright lie had been documented, time-stamped, and layered into a case so airtight that no amount of emotional blackmail could unravel it. My attorney, Sable Winters, filed the last of the paperwork before noon that Friday, her voice as calm as it had been on day one, but there was a distinct edge of finality in her tone now. We had reached the end of the game. Fraud. Forgery. Attempted trespassing. Mail tampering. Identity misrepresentation. Illegal attempts to establish residency. Every charge had a corresponding piece of evidence. The lease with the fake middle initial. The call to the utility company where my father impersonated a caretaker. The vehicle registration request filed by Nathan using my home address. The locksmith's ban on my cameras. The mail forwarding attempt. The sheriff's report. The voicemail logs. The screenshots of Facebook lies, the forwarded messages from mutual contacts, the full timeline of escalation from subtle manipulation to criminal behavior. All of it was catalogued, cross-referenced, signed, sealed, and submitted through every appropriate legal channel. And when it was all filed, when the last affidavit had been notarized and the last exhibit attached, Sable sent a final cease and desist letter. Not a courtesy. Not a request. A definitive statement backed by every inch of legal authority available to her office. It was clear, absolute, and stripped of all emotional pretense. No further contact. No communication in any form, directly or through intermediaries. No appearance on or near my property. No claims of access, ownership, residency, or familial rights. No third-party filings on my behalf. Any violation moving forward would trigger immediate legal consequences. This wasn't a threat. It was a promise, backed by fact and statute and case law. She sent it directly to each of them, my mother, my father, Nathan, with certified digital delivery and a legal acknowledgement tracker to confirm when the message was opened. It was delivered in silence, with no warning and no accompanying explanation, because there was nothing left to explain. She also blind copied me on the message, and I sat at my kitchen table and read it line by line, each sentence a scalpel, clean and exacting. No rage. No pleading. Just precision. That was the moment I realized I had won. Not in the loud, dramatic sense that people imagine when they think of winning against a toxic family. Not with a scream or a fight or a triumphant declaration. I didn't need to yell or slam doors. I didn't post anything. I didn't tell them off. I didn't go to war with them on their level. Instead, I did the one thing they never expected me to do. I stopped engaging. I didn't respond to the lies. I documented them. I didn't argue about ownership. I proved it. I didn't react to manipulation. I built a wall of receipts. I didn't explain myself. I built a legal defense so complete they could barely breathe near it without risking prosecution. I outmaneuvered them at every turn, not because I was trying to destroy them, but because I was done allowing them to destroy me. They wanted to overwhelm me with noise. I answered with silence and paperwork. They wanted a scene. I gave them consequences. The cabin sat quietly behind me, every inch of it still mine, still untouched by their desperation. The cameras remained active. The smart locks unchanged. The guest policy still posted inside the closet door. Nothing had been dismantled. Nothing had been surrendered. Their false narrative never made it past Facebook. Their fake lease never held up. Their attempt at control crumbled because they were fighting against someone who had finally stopped playing defense. In the end, they had nothing left to grab. No keys. No sympathy. No access. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. There was no spike of victory, no dramatic exhale. What I felt instead was weightless clarity, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had done what I came here to do. I had protected what was mine. I had set a boundary and reinforced it, not with threats or emotion, but with structure. I didn't ask them to understand. I demanded that they comply. I had no illusions that they would ever apologize or admit what they'd done. That wasn't why I did any of this. I didn't want their validation. I wanted distance. Security. Autonomy. I had all of that now. The mountain remained silent. The snow outside had started falling again, dusting the steps and covering the deep scars left by the tires of the cars that didn't belong here. I watched it fall for a long time. No interruptions. No more surprises. Checkmate. Christmas morning began the way I always hoped it would, quiet, snow falling in soft spirals outside the cabin windows, the fire already crackling in the hearth, and the air scented faintly with cedar and cinnamon. There was no tension in my body, no pit in my stomach waiting for a knock on the door, no buzzing anxiety pressing against my skin. There was only calm. For the first time in my adult life, Christmas didn't feel like a performance I had to endure for the sake of others. It felt like mine. By mid-morning, the sound of tires crunching up the gravel drive broke the stillness, but this time, my pulse didn't spike. I smiled. I stood at the window, watching as my friends, my real family, climbed out of their cars, bundled in scarves and parkas, arms full of wrapped boxes and brown paper bags with bakery labels scribbled in marker. One of them waved through the snow, her gloved hand raised high, and I waved back before opening the door wide. There were no rehearsed greetings, no forced smiles, no ulterior motives hiding behind hugs. Just warmth. Laughter. Familiar voices echoing through the wood-paneled cabin as boots were kicked off and jackets peeled away, snow melting in puddles near the door. Someone passed me a steaming thermos of hot cocoa the second I stepped back inside, and someone else handed me a tin of still-warm cinnamon rolls, wrapped in foil and love. The smell alone filled the kitchen like an embrace. We settled in quickly, as we always did. They each knew which rooms were theirs. The guest rooms had been prepared days in advance, fresh linens, cozy throws, spare toothbrushes and slippers tucked into drawers. No one had to ask. No one had to be reminded of rules or limits. There was an understanding among us that had been built not through obligation, but through years of showing up for each other. Quiet loyalty. Mutual respect. Chosen family. We spent the afternoon playing board games at the long dining table, mugs of cider warming our hands, music playing low in the background, the fire snapping softly just a few feet away. Someone lit the pine-scented candles I'd left on the mantel. Someone else passed out cookies, and another kept score with a dry erase board they'd pulled from their backpack. We argued playfully over rules and laughed until our faces hurt. At one point, we took turns opening the small gifts we had brought for one another. Books, handmade crafts, inside joke t-shirts, thoughtful notes scribbled on scrap paper. There were no expensive surprises, no forced gratitude. Every present came with a smile and a story. As the sun dipped lower and the golden light of late afternoon began to stretch through the glass wall, I stepped into the hallway and pulled open the drawer where I kept the spare keys. They were simple, identical, smooth brass with a blue plastic cap. I handed them out, one by one, looking each person in the eye as I placed the key into their palm. "You don't ever have to ask," I said. There was no ceremony. No applause. Just quiet understanding. A few of them nodded. One hugged me tightly. Another said, "You're home now." And I was. For the first time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't waiting for someone to crash through the front door and claim what I had built. This was my home, and these were the people who had earned a place in it, not through force or manipulation, but through presence. Through choosing me when they didn't have to. Later, as we sat around the fire, watching snow collect in soft drifts on the porch railings, my phone buzzed once, just once. A single notification lit up the screen. I reached for it out of habit, half expecting the kind of message that might sour the moment. But when I saw the name, I paused. It was my grandmother. She hadn't messaged me since before everything unfolded. She hadn't asked for updates. She hadn't tried to play peacemaker or guilt me into reconciliation. She had simply waited. She had trusted that I would handle it my way. I opened the message. It was just one line. Proud of you for not opening the door. That was it. No lecture. No hesitation. No fear of offending the rest of the family. Just recognition. I stared at the words for a long time, the warmth of the fire on my skin, my friends laughing softly behind me, the smell of cinnamon and pine lingering in the air. And in that moment, everything finally felt aligned. I didn't need a bigger tree or a pile of gifts or a carefully curated holiday agenda. I had boundaries. I had peace. I had people who respected both. I had my grandmother's quiet vote of confidence, typed into my screen with the weight of generations behind it. I didn't reply right away. I didn't need to. She knew I'd received it. She knew I understood. That night, when the games were put away and the fire burned down to embers and the cabin was filled with the soft sounds of contentment, distant laughter, creaking wood, someone humming a tune under their breath, I stepped out onto the deck, wrapped in a blanket, and looked out over the darkened valley. The snow shimmered in the moonlight, untouched and wide and still. It was mine. Not just the land. Not just the walls or the title deed. But the stillness. The security. The clarity. The rules, the locks, the keys. The life inside it. Every inch earned, every line held. My house. My rules. My peace.